Dear participants in this session, I would like to welcome you here and thank you for this very high interest in this subject matter and in the topic of our session, which is about the gas as an efficient and effective tool for achieving the environmental targets of the global economy. Indeed, in the global economy, we need more and more energy resources because we do see economic growth, and economic growth is primarily about the growth of energy consumption. And in the last 20 years, the consumption of primary energy sources grew by almost 50%, and of electricity by almost 80%. At the same time, if you take a look at the structure of the global energy balance of today, you will see that, in fact, about 80% of this energy balance would be classical fossils like oil, coal, and gas. And only 3% of the energy balance would be solar and wind. And as a matter of fact, this growth by 50% of the consumption of primary sources was ensured by 85% through the fossil sources, and gas contributed quite significantly in this overall performance, 25%. As far as renewable sources of energy are concerned, there we see that their contribution was, in the last 20 years, into this absolute growth, their contribution was only 8%. Here we can see that from the point of view of the share in the world energy balance and the contribution of the renewable sources of energy in the growth of the consumption of energy in the world, we really don't see a picture that the renewables will have a dominating position or a dominating contribution into the structure of this world energy balance. At the same time, I should note here that the growth of the consumption of primary sources by almost 50% was accompanied by the same 50% growth of the CO2 emissions. Now, talking about renewable sources of energy, I should note here that, as a matter of fact, we still have about 40% of the global population cooking using firewood. And among the leading renewable sources of energy, the first ranking goes to the good old hydropower engineering and firewood, and solar and wind. And the share of solar and wind today is not significant, although in the last 10 years the solar and wind energy was invested heavily, $2.5 trillion, and the growth of installed capacity in this sector was 700 gigawatts, or 770 gigawatts. That is solar plus wind, which produces about 5% of the total energy generation. On the other hand, we should note here is that CO2 targets are being achieved, and the structure of the world energy balance is not changing and is more or less stable. This correlation between the growth of energy consumption and the CO2 generation, this correlation has been quite stable in the last 10 years. Perhaps we can now claim that the stake on solely on renewable sources is not proper and is not working, and this target setting is not working, and the total decarbonization of the world economy is a utopia. We need to understand that in the next 20 years, the role of fossils will remain significant, and we also need to understand that in this share of the fossil fuels, we will see probably the most significant changes thanks to the growth of production and consumption of natural gas, and hence the growth of the share of natural gas in the global energy balance. Today, the share of gas in that balance is about 22%. Gas goes after oil and coal. At the same time, oil is the main source of energy. So, if you come back to the voting results that we have just had in the beginning of this session, as you understand, I actually voted for option 1, that is, I voted yes. And I can still assume that the 29% in the audience who voted no, perhaps they really took the question too straightforward, that gas is going to dominate in the energy balance, and by the year 2035 this is not going to happen. What will happen is that the share of gas in the energy balance would probably be equal to the share of oil. We are optimists, and we believe that the share is actually going to be higher than that of oil. So the 29% are people who still think that the share of gas and oil in the year 2035 would be the same. However, this target for the period until 2035, this target of trying to equalize the shares of gas and oil is quite realistic, and given the tendencies in the leading world markets, I think they all serve as a proof and as an evidence that this is going to happen. At the same time, I should say that when we're talking about renewables, we mentioned that huge investments went into solar and wind energy. Undoubtedly, we saw the more generation of power in this sector of energy. However, we also can say that we can take a fresh look. We can take a fresh look, and we can also see new challenges in security. And the thing is that solar and wind energy, they all require almost 100% backup capacity of the assets using traditional fuels. And maintaining such a backup capacity and maintaining and preserving the traditional infrastructure to deliver such traditional fuels. And these are totally new challenges in the area of security. If you want solar and wind, yes, please, go ahead. You can invest, you can build, and but you also need to remember that you need to have almost a 100% backup capacity for such renewables. The second important point would be whether this model is competitive enough. When you develop renewables, solar and wind, when you also provide for 100% backup, and we all understand that there are examples of such approaches, but basically we are talking about subsidizing wind and solar at the expense of the end users. So are those models quite feasible and economically feasible? The answer is unfortunately no. These models are not really economically feasible totally, or at least partially. And as far as gas is concerned, of course, we realize that gas has its own competitive advantages, which, first of all, when we are saying that the gas is probably one of the purest and cleanest sources of energy, the reserves of gas are large, and those gas reserves are accessible and to humanity. And most importantly, today there are developed technologies of production, transportation, and storage of gas. And the gas business is highly profitable.
When we say that gas in absolute volumes in terms of global energy is going to go up, there'll be more of it, the share of it will increase, it means that this growth will be there. And it will be ensured, first of all, at the expense of energy and transportation. So we know what the advantages of gas as fossil fuel, we know what those are, but we know that there are pros and cons and advantages in every industry, in every sector. Speaking about energy, it's purer, cleaner energy. It's safer. And it's energy which is of interest for investors, because from the economical standpoint it's very attractive and effective and efficient. So we're talking about 14-15% or so. So what's next? We're saying that the power stations are built rapidly. And if you want to adjust the mode, it takes minutes. Apart from coal stations, when we're talking about hours, or when we're talking about nuclear stations, we're talking about days. So please welcome a colleague of ours and a friend, Mr. Zele. Rainer just said that he was late not only because of the weather conditions in the Eastern Europe that almost prevented him to arrive on time, but it's the weather conditions in Poland specifically. So, Rainer, please join our discussion. So, no doubt, this flexibility, operational flexibility of gas power stations has a lot of competitive advantages. It's very competitive in energy, and not only because we know that generation means advantages in heat energy. And if we talk about such a country as Germany, then in Germany, gas amounts to 50%. Transportation. There are some advantages as well, because the consumer has an opportunity, has a chance to save a little bit. And if you take the European market, liquefied gas is much better than diesel. For example, you pay 10 euros and you can go 10 kilometers longer, further than using just gas, and 1.7 times more than using diesel. And in transportation, gas is 20-30% lower than traditional types of fuel. So we're saying that gas is going to grow, volumes are going to go up in global terms by 2035. We're saying that its share is going to increase. it'll be almost on the same level as oil or even higher. And we're saying that it's going to be in energy sector and transportation. So we can say that for the Russian Federation in the next several decades, gas is going to be a strategical resource for our strategic development, and our gas industry, first of all, will have an impact on the two closest, most dynamic markets, European market and Chinese market. Speaking about European market, we can say that European market shows demand 5%, and we're also saying that in Europe there's another very important trend for us that actually ensures demand for Russian gas is reduction of own volumes of production. In Europe, this number has gone down by 37%, in Germany by 71%, at the expense of own resources. As of today, Germany can capture only 7% of its own gas consumption. Speaking about absolute reserves, since 2006, the proven reserves in Europe have reduced by 1.5 trillion, and remaining 1.1 trillions, 1.3. What does it mean? It means that another niche is reopening for import, more opportunities for Russian gas delivery to the European gas market. So by 2035, we're saying that the own production in Europe will go down by another factor of 2, and additional opportunities for gas delivery will amount to around 200 billion cubic meters. And the biggest share will be Russian gas. Because, as you know, we can deliver gas to Europe as much as Europe needs. Chinese market. 2017 showed that the demand is around 17%, and that's the highest number. As for gas import, almost 30% growth, and consumption in 2017 amounted to 237 billion cubic meters. And China has started addressing urgent environmental issues. And by 2020, it looks very realistic that the goals that China has set, gas consumption 360 billion cubic meters, and increasing its share in on the energy balance up to 10%. The recent winter in China showed that they were short of gas. And no doubt for the Chinese market, given the situation that I've just pointed out and just described, it's important to maintain the parity in import between pipeline gas and liquefied natural gas. This parity must be somewhere around 50-50, give or take. And pipeline delivery from reliable suppliers actually allow to live through the peak seasons. That'll be fall and spring. So it means that in midterm, 2035, we see that there'll be another niche in China, 180 for pipeline gas, or 200 perhaps billion cubic meters, according to our estimations, 110 billion would be Russian pipeline gas. But the second half, taking into account the economics of China, LNG will show some growth. There'll be more demand. So, according to our analysis, by 2035, this is going to be 235 billion, or maybe for LNG, 110 million tons. So it means that, speaking about the global growth of the LNG market, China will take around 30% of this growth. Without a doubt, we do take this into account in our planning process, and of course we're talking about large infrastructural, major infrastructural projects. On the 20th of December next year, we will start pipeline deliveries to China, and as for European market, you perhaps already know that we've completed construction of the first line of the sea line, the Turkish stream, and we are prepared to start working on Severny Potok, or Northern Stream 2.